This B Podcast Network show is presented by IXL. IXL's all-inclusive online teaching and learning platform simplifies edtech needs and accelerates achievement in 95 of the top 100 U.S. school districts. IXL delivers personalized learning across a comprehensive pre-K-12 curriculum, including math, language arts, science, and social studies, and it helps you assess student performance through actionable real-time insights at every level of your school or district. This one solution performs work that typically requires dozens of different tools. Want to find out why so many leading districts trust IXL? Visit IXL.com/BE. That's IXL.com/BE. We're proud to be sponsored by MyFlex Learning. MyFlex Learning is a scheduling platform that helps middle and high schools meet the individual needs of all students. Schools can easily create and manage time for flex blocks, win time, activity periods, RTI, counselor and teacher appointments, and much more. And with its built-in accountability tool and reporting features, MyFlex Learning solves your challenges around getting kids where they need to be and understanding how flex time is spent. Make your flex time work for you. Visit myflexlearning.com/BE to learn more and receive $500 off the first year. That's myflexlearning.com/BE. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Authority Podcast here on the B Podcast Network. As always, we really appreciate you. AI, artificial intelligence. Sometimes it could seem like all anyone talks about nowadays, but if you've been listening to the Summer of AI series on Transformative Principle, for example, you know how important it is that we really do discuss AI thoughtfully, understand what it means for the future of education, for our students, for the economy, right? And everything that's happening in our schools, preparing our students for that future. So today, I'm really pleased to bring you a guest who has much to say on this topic. He has a brand new book out on it. Priten Shah is the CEO of Pedagogy.Cloud, which provides innovative technology solutions to help educators navigate global challenges in a rapidly evolving world. He's also the founder of civics education nonprofit United for Social Change, and he's author of the book we're discussing today, which is called AI and the Future of Education, Teaching in the Age of Artificial Intelligence. Priten, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ross. Thanks for having me.
So, one of the things among teachers in particular, but a lot of people, right? in a lot of different lines of work and parts of society, there's a lot of the rumors, confusion, fear around the rise of AI. Certainly over the past year or so, it seems like all of a sudden it's everywhere. And even though the concepts of artificial intelligence, machine learning have been around for quite a while, it's become inescapable. And I think the more inescapable something is, the more some people want to escape it, right? So I thought maybe what we should start with, just to context set for our conversation, is just to get the baseline definitions of AI and machine learning, understanding just functionally, what does it mean? What is the technology, right? How is it designated when something's in that bucket, so that it doesn't feel like it's everything, right? We have a good understanding of it, and then we can really talk about it more thoughtfully.
Yeah, cool. That's a great place to start. So I think the key place to start is thinking about AI in general. And so, the way we like to explain it is it's the mimicking of human-like thinking and processing by a computer. And that seems to be an easy definition for most folks to start with. Now, this has a whole range of things. So we as humans do a lot of our intelligence comprises a lot of different tasks. And so we can do something as simple as process auditory input when we're listening to each other talk. We can see each other's faces and facial expressions and recognize there's a lamp in our background. And we can also do some sort of thinking and processing and synthesizing of information that's fed to us. And artificial intelligence is the attempt to at least try to get computers to do all of that. And there's subsets that technology has already been able to do in the last couple of decades. Our Siri systems can artificially output voice the way a human might output voice. Now, those aren't really great at actually processing the input and coming up with original thought, but the ability to mimic human voice and words is actually really good. So that's what it's the intelligence that it's trained on, the intelligent task it's trained on, rather, is that. Now, none of that is what's causing the uproar, though. And so no one's freaking out in schools because of Siri. Folks are freaking out because of a particular new implementation of this, which is the generative AI landscape. And generative AI, it's kind of in the name there, is artificial intelligence that actually generates tasks. And so while a lot of these other AI tasks are great at regurgitating, at classifying, the new technology that's coming out is much better at creating original output. And the way it does this, and I'm going to try to make this as simple as possible for the sake of, so we can get to the core of the impact here, is that it takes a large data set. And so, for example, OpenAI's ChatGPT has taken a large data set of text, and then it tries to figure out what's going on in that data set. So it looks for patterns, it looks for things that it can recognize as hallmarks of different types of data within it so that it can replicate those things. And so it might recognize that the word that always shows up in this particular context, the word always shows up in this particular context. And then it starts to build bigger and bigger understandings of the human language based on that.
In my work, I've collaborated directly with hundreds of educators to support their success. Do you know which of their edtech frustrations comes up time and again? The sheer number of tools out there and the difficulty of knowing which ones schools like theirs are using to get results. IXL is different. Not only does it perform the functions of dozens of tools, it's currently delivering results for 1 in 4 U.S. students, including those in 95 of the top 100 districts. Another major pain point that comes up when a school is excited to implement a new tool only to find out the teachers hate it. Yikes. It helps to know that IXL is loved and trusted by more than 1 million teachers, saving them time on prep work while enabling them to better support student learning. IXL is research proven to accelerate achievement. Studies across 45 states show that IXL schools outperform non-IXL schools on state assessments. And independent research from Johns Hopkins University verifies that IXL meets ESSA Tier 1 standards. With those results combined with IXL's teacher-friendly reputation, what more could you ask for? If you have a goal to increase achievement for all students, make sure to find out what IXL can do for you. Visit IXL.com/BE for a demo. That's IXL.com/BE.
It uses that understanding to now generate new text, new images, depending on what the data that it's been trained on. And that's where it starts to sound more human-like, because it's not copying and pasting something. It's not giving you here's a list of 10 links you can find the way even some of the search engines do. It's producing brand new original output that caters to what you've input into it. Okay. Maybe I'll stop there for a second, but we should. There's
Sure.
a lot more to dig into
here.
I
mean, you talk about generative AI and the enormity of that data set and the ways in which it's used. I think that ties into, there's a couple of different ways to group those who are maybe feeling fear around the rise of AI. There may be some who haven't engaged with it much at all and are just kind of maybe hoping it goes away. But then there's a lot of folks, including the creators of the technologies themselves, who are examining various ethical concerns and trying to think about, okay, as these technologies evolve, we understand that they're going to become a part of our daily reality and they're not going to just disappear. But how does that impact ethics in a variety of areas? When we're dealing with students, of course, we have even more concerns around their privacy and their data and the ways in which they engage with technology. What are some of the ethical concerns that are important that we think through as we're considering our implementation of AI tech?
Yeah, and I think that's also another great place to start. I think just centering the conversation on ethics also makes that, I think folks starting to address folks' fears first is a great place to begin the conversation. And so I think the ethics things kind of be put into 2 buckets. And so maybe even 3 buckets, right? So you have the first bucket, which is what the students are doing within the school systems as they use these AI technologies. And so their ethical considerations there end up being our privacy security concerns or data privacy concerns, and really figuring out what kinds of data from our students are we sharing with third parties, right? So that's a bucket of ethical concerns that we can definitely talk about. The second is, what are our students going to do with this technology, right? So how are they going to be using this technology within their own lives, outside of the school systems? What kinds of AI literacy are we building with our students so that when they're at home using ChatGPT, they're not using it in a way that's actually, unethical or is damaging or harmful to somebody else? And then the third, or hopefully as they all grow up and they become pioneers in these fields, they start using this technology in their careers, also so that they have that mindset of what kinds of data sets are we going to use when I'm working at it as an engineer, and to make sure that my algorithm that I'm building is not biased, right? So all the AI literacy components there in terms of building students who are responsible users of AI technology and responsible creators of AI technology in the future. The third is our ethical concerns that we have with any new technology in the education space, which is making sure that we don't make the achievement gap worse, which is making sure that the digital divide is solved so that we're not exacerbating the implications of that, and figuring out ways that we're not leaving behind students in terms of as we implement new technology by either limiting their access or by moving too quickly into implementing the technology. And so I think those are three buckets of ethical areas. I think we can talk about all of them quite a bit, but I would definitely want to sort those concerns into those three buckets.
Yeah, what's going on, particularly on the student data privacy piece, because that's of course been an ongoing concern for as long as tech's been around, right? And every tech company has had to consider that, grapple with it, improve their processes. And now we have technology that's fast moving, that's freely available, that is collecting more data than ever before, right? And that students are also, as you said, like using on their own time in addition to potentially in schools. So it's not just a classroom technology, and yet it's happening at such a rate that there may not have even been enough time for the students and the adults around them to even think about, okay, what data are we even giving to this thing, and what does that mean, and how might it be used, and is it personally identifiable, and what is all that? I mean, what's the progression of those conversations as it stands?
Yeah, I think this is where we are starting to see some of the conversations take place and finally see some implications of it too. So I think thinking through what kinds of data we have media literacy conversations with our students already, right? We talk to them about what they share on social media, what they chat with folks about on social media, what they post on their profiles on the internet. And we try to create healthy habits around this so that they're not sharing personal identifiable information already with, like you said, existing technologies that we're either implementing in schools or we know that they're accessing outside of schools. The reason this technology becomes a little bit more complicated is because it's collecting so much more data. And that's crazy in the context of when we know how much data Google is collecting, when we know how much data Facebook is collecting, to say that it's collecting even more data is kind of frightening. But the amount of data that's exchanged when you're having multiple conversations, naturally flowing conversations, and then especially using an educational context where they can be talking about, what they might be writing a personal statement for a college essay, lots of personal information shared there. They might be reaching out for SEL help, whatever it may be. However we start implementing these technologies in our classrooms, the amount of data they'll collect is going to get greater and greater. Now, data collection on its own is not bad. It might actually make this technology actually more powerful in productive ways, right? In fact, I think that as we started with, this relies on some form of data collection in order for it to be effective. And the way that we reap the benefits of this AI technology long term is by giving them the data that we need and by letting it personalize it to the data that we're providing it. The concern is what this is done with that data. And so this is where the accountability structures, whether they be governmental, whether they be consumer-based, and whether they be self-initiated by these companies themselves. And I think most likely some combination of all three, where I think our teachers and schools will be making decisions that will influence what kinds of safeguards the companies put in place. It does look like these companies are at least trying to have a data privacy first rhetoric, at least. We'll get to see how much of this becomes implemented in actual practice. And then we'll have to wait for some policy guidance from the top. But all of that, the concern really is like we need to share as much data as possible to make it as effective as possible, and while making sure the data is not used for any other purpose. And that's always the key with any of our data privacy concerns, is always what is done with the data besides what we are asking them to do with it. And this is where we saw some of the opt-out clauses that started coming out in terms of allowing it to be trained, deleting of the data that's used within these systems. And I think we'll see more of that conversation, right? I think we'll see more about, the data is only stored for XYZ days. It's not used to train anyone. What access is provided to anybody else? Because my worries are, it's one thing to commercialize this data, and that alone is a massive concern. If folks, the amount of data they have to be able to, and combine that with the power of generative AI, And now you have hyper-targeted commercial ads, you have hyper-targeted pamphlets going into the mail based on these conversations. And that's a concern on its own. And then as a civics nonprofit founder, I had to mention that there's also a huge civics component to this. And so these companies having access to that much personally identifiable information, knowing how a student thinks, knowing how a student writes, knowing how a student is processing information that it's being fed, can all be a massive tool in misinformation campaigns. And so the concern really is, are we making sure these companies that are collecting this data are using it only for educational purposes that we're opting into, that students are opting into, that parents are opting into, obviously, at the K-12 level? And are we making sure that this data is secure enough so that it's not being used in any malicious way, whether those be commercial purposes or misinformation manipulative purposes in the civics angle as well?
Right. And also on the other point, I think one of the topics that comes up a lot in these conversations that many within the education field are presenting maybe as their primary ethical concern. And yeah, I think tellingly, you didn't list it as one of them, because to me, it's a different topic altogether. It's teaching and learning is assessments, the fear of AI related cheating. What does that look like? And, the reality that it comes down to a question of, what are we teaching? What are we wanting students to learn? And are we creating assignments and objectives and learning targets that are not where cheating doesn't become the objective, right? Because if you really can use these tools just to complete an assignment, then it's the assignment. What's its value when we think about, okay, if these are the tools that are going to be used in the workplace and so on, right? If we consider that cheating, well, ultimately it's already taken off in the economy that you're going to be at a disadvantage if you don't know how to use the tools. And yet, if you're not learning the types of skill, thinking, and other things that are going to have you establish your knowledge base and your value apart from the use of the tools, you're at a disadvantage. So what's your perspective on assessment and that question of, oh, we need to outlaw these tools because they're just used for cheating, and how that conversation goes?
Yeah, you called me out rightfully on that one. That I purposely do not. I don't think about the plagiarism cheating angle as one of the ethical issues with the AI technology itself, right? So, and I think this is largely because the public narrative has been cheating tool, and I think that's missing the entire picture, right? I think that framing this as a cheating tool, first of all, is feeding into this like forbidden fruit narrative for the students themselves, and so even in terms of like doing a little bit of catching up, I think it was a really poor policymaking angle to go out and tell a bunch of students that we're going to ban this on school computers because it's a cheating tool, which they're now going home and accessing because they all just heard about it through the district announcements that were made in the spring. But the reality is that the ethical problem with banning the technology, it has nothing to do with the cheating, right? And I'll talk a little bit about the cheating in a bit too. But we also have to, I think it's what you said, right? The students are going to be having to encounter these technologies in the real world when they graduate. And so you start banning these technologies, you start telling them this is something we're not going to talk about, you're not allowed to use it. And we're doing a disservice to our students. And I think we're fundamentally not fulfilling the purpose of public education, right? So, the ninth graders who are walking into the classrooms right now, the world that they're being prepared for, that is not the world they're going to be graduating out into. This world already looks quite a bit different. Professional areas look very different than they did about 6 months ago, let alone a few years ago. A few years from now, the prevalence of the technology within career paths is going to be substantially greater. And the technology is going to be stronger. And so if we're not even preparing students to use the technology that exists now, I think we're doing them a disservice by approaching this from the let's ban this is a cheating tool, it's a plagiarizing tool, you're not allowed to talk about it, you're not allowed to use it angle. I think the reason that's becoming the primary focus is because we were caught a little off guard. And I think I have lots of sympathy and empathy here towards educators who are struggling with it, because I think we weren't prepared for a world in which all of our assignments became irrelevant overnight. And, I like to compare this to the COVID-19 pandemic in terms of the shock to the education system that it had, with one big difference is that it's not going away. And so I think when COVID-19 was coming around, everybody was like coming up with their Band-Aid solutions. We're figuring, okay, we'll do this for this year. We'll figure out this solution. We'll train our teachers on exactly this subset of things that are necessary to get us through the next 6 months, a year, whatever. We knew there was going to be an end to it. The reality is this isn't going away. And is only going to get stronger, the technology and both ends prevalence. And so I think the reality is that figuring out plagiarism policies, honor policies, detection tools, bands, those are all extremely band-aid options. And I think most of them already don't work. Forget about like will be working
Right.
or not by the end of the school year. And I think this is where reevaluating our assessments is the key path forward. And that sounds daunting. And I think folks are terrified of it. I think that level of rethinking what homework we're assigning, what classwork we're doing, how we think about what the goals and purposes of our education system is not something that's easy to do within 6 months, a year, even a few years. And there's no centralized place for this conversation to take place, right? So these conversations are taking place. We're having it today. There are conversations taking place at university levels. Folks are having them in the teacher break rooms, but there's no central place where everybody's thinking about, okay, we need to rethink what our education system is doing, how we're assessing students, and what we're assessing them for. And I think that's the key here, is that we can figure out stopgap measures to find ways to make sure that the students can still write a polished essay without us figuring out, without using a chat GPT or Bing chat alternative. But why, right? Like, I think that we really have to ask why, and I think this is where like really thinking about our assessments and what exactly do we want our students to walk away from when they step out of our schools is going to be an important part of having this conversation. So do we want them to step out of our high schools and when they're graduating 12th grade with this portfolio of 15 polished essays that they're going to walk around the world with? No teacher will tell you that, right? Like no one thinks that the actual finished work product is what is the key benefit of the essay writing process or most of the assignments that are assigned. We ask them to write essays, we ask for because of the process. And so I think when we overemphasize this final work output, where we need this polished essay that's due and that's your 50% of your grade, the bar for a student to cheat is really, really low. They have a really high incentive to do so. It's really easy to do so now. And unless we reframe what the point of any of the assignments are and rethink how we approach these assignments, they will take that option. But there's just like there is no honor policy, there is plagiarism detector that is going to prevent students from taking that option. Now, what if that's a lot of naysaying and that's a lot of like the doomsday talk. And when I have these conversations with folks, their questions are, oh, what kind of an honor policy can I build? What plagiarism detectors actually effectively detect AI? Those are not the right questions, right? And unfortunately, that's like I think 80% of the questions we get when we're doing PD, when we're talking to teachers, when we're on our social media. And I get it, right? Like that is the easiest next step to get back to a little bit of normalcy for us. So you use things that we're familiar with, but that's not the reality. Is that those aren't going to work. And so the more we try focusing on, how do we detect this? How do we stop this? I think we're keep missing out on time to sit down and rethink, do we even want to assign a take-at-home essay anymore? Do we want to even assign an essay at all anymore? Do we want to have them write an essay in class? Do we want to have AI technologies be incorporated into the essay writing process with our students, right? And I think this is where we have an opportunity now to do what I think a lot of teachers have wanted to do, but standardized testing, teacher burnout, all of those things have prevented this level of innovation in the education space, is make our classrooms more active, right? So I like my go-to example, someone's like, what can I actually still do in my classroom that's AI proof? I'm like, we have so many options. Like we have options that we've all been using in small little bursts here and there. Graduate schools have been using. The case study method is a great example of like, go do whatever you want at home, study the case, talk to your peers about it, go talk to ChatGPT about it, do your research, but come to class prepared to talk about it, right? And I think that's where we're starting to emphasize to students that the goal is ingraining the knowledge within themselves, right? They need to know how to think about this stuff. They need to know how to articulate this stuff so that they can then have put this into ChatGPT and get a final work product, but just with their own thoughts, with their own reasoning. And they have some capabilities to actually ask the right questions, put in the right information to get the final work output. Yeah, I mean, I can keep, again, these are all topics that I could probably keep going on and on about. So I'll let you
there's
control
a
the flow here.
question,
But
there's a question as with so much of the discussion, and when we think about education, how it needs to change and innovate is the work that happens inside the formal education environment. Is that context representative of what happens in the rest of the world? So these technologies exist, they're out there, kids have access to them. If we're not recognizing that, leading into that, and trying to make that a productive part of teaching and learning, all we're really doing is potentially doing a disservice to all students, but more likely really doing a disservice to students that are going to be less advantaged to begin with, right? Because they may have less access at home to technologies to learn from other people who know about them, whatever that the case may be. And so just because it's not happening in school, like some of the kids will learn about it, will learn how to use it, and then they'll be advantaged in that way, and other kids won't, and they won't be. And if the purpose of schools is to focus on that, it ties into, I had an interesting conversation yesterday around, we started talking about digital equity, right? And all the things schools have been doing over the last handful of years, pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, after the pandemic, and the various undulations that conversation has taken. And when there's like pushback between it doesn't seem like it's working and things like that. And it eventually led to, okay, well, the overarching objective is educational equity, right? It's equity in opportunity for teaching learning, opportunity for economic opportunity, et cetera. And then digital equity is a big part of that. But I think there's times when it's misidentified where the inequities are coming from. So in this case, for example, we could have two different schools or two different classrooms where all the students have, there's no prohibitions on any of these tools. Everybody has the same access, connectivity, etc. One teacher is really trained and really effective at teaching with AI tools or any technology, and the other one isn't, right? Well, there's going to be inequity there, that it's not about the digital side of things, but it's part of it is one, that spectrum from okay, rejecting to just accepting and it's okay to really embracing. And embracing, as you talk about with the ethical concern, it doesn't mean just gung-ho saying yes to everything, but it means saying, look, there's high potential here. I need to learn about it. So, you know, and part of that is things that educators could take upon themselves, but another part of it is, okay, these are things that schools and districts need to be thinking about. What does the training need to look like that we're providing to our teachers to make sure that they don't feel confused and fearful about this? They're confident, they understand what it is, they understand that they're allowed to use it and not have to fear that they're going to be branded as facilitating cheating, right? And understand that they're. And now a quick break for a word from our sponsor, MyFlex Learning. Let's talk about flex time in schools. The potential benefits to our students make it totally worth exploring. There's more time for personalized learning, increased choice and agency for students, and the increased engagement that comes along with it, dedicated time for intervention, and overall, as school leaders, it provides you and your faculty more tools to increase academic achievement. But the implementation and management of flex time can be a challenge. Tricky logistics and a lack of clear accountability systems can prevent teachers from buying in. It can hold you back from ensuring students make good use of their time. That's why I'm pleased to share that MyFlex Learning provides a solution to these challenges and more. MyFlex Learning helps you create and manage flexible time for any purpose. And with the seamless SIS integration, a student locator, flexible daily rostering, and intuitive mobile app, it eliminates the common challenges of implementation and management. If you want to see for yourself, visit myflexlearning.com/BE to learn more and receive $500 off the first year of use. That's myflexlearning.com/BE. You'll learn all about MyFlex Learning, what it can do for your school, and you'll receive a $500 off offer for your first year. Check it out. Expertise at teaching with tools is advantaging their students so that they can learn better from somebody who knows. But what have you looked at as far as thoughts around like the training and guidance to be provided on that part, and not guidance around the honor code, but guidance around, okay, here's how we need to actually push things forward.
Yeah, and this is a big part of our work, is building some of the competencies within teachers, for teachers, providing direct support to teachers and working with districts. Because I think you're right that I think that a lot of there's a weird range of responses that we've seen in the last 6 months, and I'm not convinced that any of them fully is hitting the head on the nail here. And there is like lots of workshops happening about figuring out your honor policies, like you're saying. And honestly, like at this point, like I look at those and I roll my eyes, because all those teachers are being left out in terms of having the conversations that they need to have to better serve their students this year. And I think this is where digital literacy among teachers in the country is already low, right? The amount of jokes that we saw coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic, the amount of catching up folks did just to figure out how to use digital technology tools to teach online, that gap was so wide and it required so much work directly with individual teachers. Districts really struggle to provide that support to teachers, that I think we have to bridge all of that gap and more in order to get teachers equipped in order to have these conversations. And part of the problem is these weren't part of teacher training programs. This is all brand new technology. Teachers haven't, it's not like something that you could have gradually built up a skill set and all this did appear overnight. So the amount of catching up that teachers, even those who are the most technologically literate and embrace technology openly, are still struggling to figure out the right ways to embrace this in ways that are ethically conscious, in ways that are not disservicing their students, in ways that are not leaving behind some students, and in ways that aren't jeopardizing their students' digital safety. And I think this is where we need to do this piecemeal. And I think if we all try to play catch up in a year or two, versus starting to do have some of these conversations now, get some of this training now, it's going to make a huge difference. But I do think the districts are responsible for this training. And unfortunately, what we're hearing from a lot of folks is the guidance top down this year has still been figure it out all out in your own classroom, write your own policies. If you want to seek some training, if you want to use this tool, we'll unban it for teachers, but keep it banned for students. Like, there is not the level of urgency that I think really needs to be there in order to equip teachers with the right amount of resources so that they can learn the technology themselves, figure out how to both use it in their own workflow, and then have productive conversations with their students about it, right? And I think you're right that it's not just about the technological access alone is a massive cause of digital divide in the country for this, right? So we will continue to see school districts that don't have one-to-one devices, that don't have even the internet bandwidth in order to be able to support the students using this technology in the classrooms. But that won't be enough. We can continue to solve those problems, but if we're not building that competency amongst our teachers, there is no resource that we can provide that is a hardware, software resource that is going to solve the problem, because these conversations need to take place in productive ways. And I think the other thing you hinted at, and this is one thing that we like to highlight with our cohort as well, is that the students are partially relying on these technologies and not talking about them with teachers because they don't feel like they can. Right. So the students, they know it's being branded as a plagiarism and cheating tool. So even if students want to use it in a productive way, they want to use it to brainstorm, they want to use it to do research, they want to use it as their individual tutor, the chances that they will open up to their teachers and have these conversations is close to zero right now. And so when teachers are being extremely strict about whether or not it's allowed to use, when they're not taking that information, I think that the students are being told that this is something that they need to do behind the scenes. And I think bringing this out into the open, having open conversations about, okay, these are technologies that are being used in these particular ways. Here's how I accept the use of these technologies. Here's how I use them myself as a teacher. Here's how I generated your homework assignment using an AI last night because I wanted to give you extra practice problems, right? Having those open conversations showing that, I think but we need to get teachers to be doing those things in order for them to have those conversations with students. But yeah, I think
Yeah, and you've indicated, right, a good opportunity there for student engagement, right? Students that are engaging in some learning on their own, they have questions that they might want to bring to their teacher and they feel like they can't. And as we've talked about, right, it's a top-down concern in a learning environment. If the principal of the school says these tools are cheating, then of course the individual teachers don't feel like they can go out and use them because they're going to say, well, why are you all encouraging cheating, right? So we need to not just allow it, but encourage it and say, look, once we get to, we're going to find realistic limits and parameters and do's and don'ts and as we go, but we need to explore here. And why wouldn't we want to create those opportunities and enable those opportunities to really engage with our students around things that they're interested in, and to have that happen organically and naturally.
Right. Yeah. And I think this is where we can have so many more productive conversations about the positive potential in education, right? And so I think if we start to have this conversation with teachers and we start to provide them that guidance, and you're right, I think it's not the folks are being told that this is plagiarism at all levels, right? And a cheating tool at all levels. And so I think the hesitance to spend some time figuring out how to productively use it in the classrooms is pretty high right now, because that is the rhetoric that they're getting from administrators. That's the rhetoric they're getting from the media. And so to sit down and think about how to bring this technology open-handed, welcome it into your classroom, the bar for that is really high. And so it takes a large amount of convincing to get folks to do that. But I think we have a really good potential here. There's really good potential here to use this technology in ways that serves both teachers and students better. So post the pandemic, there's a massive burnout crisis in the country. Teachers are struggling to keep up with their workloads. Students are extremely behind. We have massive problems that seem currently unsurmountable. Folks, there's random solutions coming out here and there that folks are trying different things, but we have not caught up from the learning loss that happened during the pandemic, and teachers are struggling because of that. When we had teacher burnout pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, that problem has gotten even worse. And these technologies, in my eyes, this is the light at the end of the tunnel. This could be, if approached properly, if integrated properly into education systems, the solution to both those problems, right? Offloading a huge chunk of the work that a teacher needs to do in order to be prepared for the next class, so that they're well rested, so that they can show up 100% for their students the next day. There's great benefit there. And when we work with teachers and they start seeing, how much of the work that feels menial and feels taxing to them, that allows them to then show up with the 5 different assignments for all the students with different learning styles, a rubric for all these new assignments that they're coming up with, PowerPoint presentations pre-drafted within one prep period, rather than having to spend days at home at night prepping for these things. They feel more encouraged that they can meet students where they are. They can do more differentiated learning, can offer a variety of assignments, make their classrooms more active, because now they have some help, and that there's huge potential there. And then if our students are directly using it, this is where, again, we can start to use the technology to play some of that catch-up games, provide them that individualized instruction, have students get practice problems that target exactly the things that they're struggling with, so that when they show up to the classroom, they're a little bit more equipped with the practice that actually suited where their learning gaps were, rather than this generic set of 5 problems that teacher who had to make problems very late at night, right? I mean, this solves everyone's problems if it's used the right way. And that conversation is not happening at the levels that it could be, right? And there's always a gap in terms of getting everybody to be enthusiastic about a technology. We're still in the fear stage of this, but I think when we get there, I think folks are going to start to see that, like, there really is amazing potential here to solve some of the key and long-lasting problems that we've been facing in our system.
Right. Yeah. And you touched on, right, we've talked a lot about how it can be used directly with students, but there's numerous ways for teachers to automate, make their work more efficient. And when we're already challenged by an educator shortage, well, like, why would we turn our back on tools that could potentially solve some of those challenges, instead of saying, well, let's just actually make things more difficult? And when we know that there's already overwork and there's already processes that take enormous amounts of time, right? And PD and teacher growth is another area where there's a lot of potential.
Yeah, and I think this is also the easiest place to start getting some buy-in from teachers and from administrators. Is maybe we don't bring it into the classroom on September 1st, right? Maybe we're not, the first thing we open our school year with isn't, let's have every single student chat with a AI bot. But I think starting the conversations this fall about how teachers themselves can start using the technology kind of starts to tie in a lot of things we've been talking about tonight, right? They can start building their own competency with the technology. They can learn its strengths, its weaknesses. They can start build their own AI literacy while saving themselves time. But I think that this is a great, and without risking any of the considerations about what data are we, obviously, again, there's considerations here about what data the teachers themselves are sharing about students, but without they're more control of that than students having individual conversations. And so to me, this is the lowest hanging fruit of AI implementation this fall, is let's get teachers to start using this technology in productive ways to streamline their own workflow that's independent of student usage, right? That to me seems like the agenda for the fall, is let's start using it those ways. The PD potentials are great. And I think that this is where, like, we need to start having some of these conversations so that we can start looking at the North Star here. My favorite examples that I've like a webinar co-host mentioned once was like a VR classroom where a teacher is like doing a lesson live for a bunch of AI students, and they get some real-time feedback for it. Even sitting down with a chatbot and saying, hey, my students were struggling with this particular concept, or there's some creative ways I can teach it. Hey, I realized that, like, I don't have enough practice, right? I don't have enough practice problems. And for this particular problem, I just think that they would get it after 5 examples. I really need like 15. Getting all those things generated, getting the assistance to really streamline your own workflow, get some more advice. I have a student with a special IEP that I'm not used to. How do I approach my lesson for that particular student? All those kinds of things can be used. AI can be used for all those inquiries that can also help the teachers on professional development.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've touched on this throughout, but I think one of the ways that we could sort of tie all this together is to contextualize it within the purpose of education overall, right? The purpose of education long term. A lot of it is determined and has been determined, but it's also shifting quickly. So, how are you viewing when we think about, okay, here's what the purpose of schools is, here's what we're trying to do for students, here are technologies who perhaps could help that. How does it all fit together to you?
Yeah. So I think oftentimes when we're thinking about the purpose of education, especially in the US with the student loan crisis, with high rates for higher education, let alone the cost of just like providing a public education in the US, we're very career oriented. And so a lot of the rhetoric is you have to do really well in school to get this really good job so you can provide for your family. And there's lots of mission statements out there. There's lots of theory out there that says that's not why we provide public education. That's not why we have liberal arts universities in the country. But the reality is no one's on the ground. No one is, not students, not teachers, not administrators. No one is seeing their purpose as that. And this is where I put my like philosophy hat on for a little bit. And my worry is that this is not the reality is that we don't know what the workforce is going to look like when these students are graduating. And so we don't know what jobs will still exist. We don't know what jobs will require what skills. And there's some predictions out there. We can all predict about which STEM skills will be more likely, which human skills will be more likely to be prioritized in the economy. But there's a good deal of this that is much more unknown than it ever was before. So we don't know what government interventions are going to be. We don't know what kinds of bans are going to be put in place on these technologies that will allow some careers to still flourish while other careers completely go away. There's a lot of unknown. But one thing we all do know is that the importance of forming individuals who can flourish in a society is still there. And so this is where I think figuring out ways that we can help our students navigate their learning process as something that's important for them for the sake of learning itself. I think that's really where we need to start thinking about, especially as we think about we can't prepare students for the current world. We don't know where the world is going to be, but we do know that students will always have to interact with their fellow humans. They will have to engage in the civic process at some point, and figuring out how can we build our education system so that students are better equipped to do that, right? So, in the last few years, we've seen a heavier emphasis on SEL. We've seen some heavier emphasis on civics, and I think that those are all roles that schools will need to continue to provide. Meeting our students, helping our students become well-functioning adults is a purpose that is independent of what society looks like with or without AI. And so I think figuring out ways we can start making sure that we're honing in on that, having those conversations at the high level, at the individual teacher level, I think that's where we need to be.
When you look at, so of all the different functions, options, potential problem solved that you've investigated, is there any that stands out as most exciting to you about where we could take schools in a few years if we get really good at using and implementing these technologies and aligning them to the very real challenges that exist, but also opportunities?
Yeah, I think this is where I think we combine those two things, right? The technology and what I think we should all kind of try to like hone in on as the purpose of education. There's amazing opportunities for students to kind of take their own learning journeys, right? And I think this is where allowing students to kind of figure out what their interests are, explore them in depth. That's not possible when you have a classroom of 35 students and one teacher in the front who has to provide a standardized curriculum to everybody. I think that the level of individualization that we can have with this technology means that we can kind of allow students to explore whatever they want within these various topics. And that can mean and I think there's like ways that that's possible now without a revamping of the education system, without a revamping of how we think about what the purpose of education is, that are also really exciting. And so my go-to example for something that we could do right now is we can make math word problems that cater to every student's individual like favorite topic. And so you can have the exact same math problem that for all 30 students, and one can be about sports, and one can be about a Disney movie, and one can be about climate change, depending on what the students' interests are. And so you're kind of starting to meet students, help them see the context of what they're learning within their own interests, within what they find interesting, get them more engaged because now they kind of have a little bit more interest in the actual learning process because they're getting things that are naturally of interest to them. But that can also, that's now. In a few years, that can mean that an entire course that they take is based on their own interest. And so maybe they have a civics requirement, but they spend that entire year focusing on a particular topic that's of interest to them and using AI technologies that can kind of help guide them through that process with the help of the teacher to learn about either climate change or learn about gender justice or learn about the voting system and voting rights and kind of have that opportunity to explore really what's of interest to them to increase student engagement. Because at the end of the day, one of the problems we're going to continue to face, and one of the problems that we're facing now is student engagement within our schools. And so again, then the reason why we're having to apply band-aid measures, the reason we're having to apply authoritarian measures is because that engagement level is really high. The buy-in isn't there from students. They're struggling with they're struggling with their level of buy-in into the education system. And so we are having to be pretty strict about work pretty hard to make sure that they stay aligned with what we want them to do. If we meet them a little bit closer to what they want to be doing in the school system, using AI technologies, because we no longer need an individual tutor per student in order to make some of this reality, I think we can actually get students to be more excited about coming to school.
Yeah, well, and isn't that a good thing to be excited about? Listeners, my guest has been Priten Shah. The book is AI and the Future of Education. It's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever you get your books. We'll put the link to that below. Priten, is there anything else you're working on or anything else our listeners should check out?
Our Instagram. So we have lots of suggestions there for folks to kind of start using this technology themselves. Prompt suggestions, tips and tricks, news headlines. So that's at Pedagogy.Cloud. We like to share lots of free resources there for folks.
Awesome. Listeners, check that out. We'll have a variety of links below for you to learn more. Please do also subscribe to The Authority for more in-depth author interviews like this one, or visit bpodcast.network to learn about all of our shows. Thanks for listening, and we'll connect with you again next time.
This has been The Authority Podcast, hosted by Ross Romano, edited by Gage Sanderson.
Do you want to simplify your school's technology, save teachers time, and improve students' performance on state assessments? You can do it all, but don't waste another minute. Head straight to ixl.com/BE to learn how IXL's research-proven teaching and learning platform can help you achieve all of these goals. That's ixl.com/BE. Do you want to simplify your school's technology, save teachers time, and improve students' performance on state assessments? You can do it all, but don't waste another minute. Head straight to ixl.com/BE to learn how IXL's research-proven teaching and learning platform can help you achieve all of these goals. That's ixl.com/BE.